As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately.
Tell us,
They said,
when will this happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age?
You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. For then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. If those days had not been cut short, no one would survive. Immediately after the distress of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. When you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. They knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come.
Another angel came out of the temple and called in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud.
Take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe.
I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. The fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun, and the sun was allowed to scorch people with fire. They were seared by the intense heat, and they cursed the name of God who had control over these plagues, but they refused to repent and glorify him. A third of the earth was burned up, a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. Then there came severe earthquake, no earthquake like it has ever occurred since the human race has been on earth. So tremendous was the quake. The great city split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations collapsed. Every island fled away, and the mountains could not be found. From the sky, huge hailstones, each weighing about 100 pounds, fell on people, and they cursed God on account of the plague of hail, because the plague was so terrible.
Above all, you must understand that in the last days, the day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar. The elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything done in it will be laid bare.
Allá está todo lo que te dije, todos los reclamaste todos. Allá está todas las lágrimas. Allá del mundo va a comenzar en agosto. La flema del mundo va a comenzar en agosto. Porque el balazo del diablo va a pegar a la punta a los gobiernos que tienen la mente del diablo. El diablo va a comenzar una guerra. La guerra que va a querer agarrar la tierra de los que no saben a tirar, comer, a usar los balazos. Estados Unidos venció. Sí. Las narices del diablo a querer comer el país. Realmente Estados Unidos sabe usarlos con fiebre, con cejos, se los va a poner, se los va a tirar el balazo en agosto y el país se va a caer así rápido, pero nunca tenían los ojos que usar los armates. Nomás pensaban que los armates eran juguetes y el diablo vino y se los quitó en el día del mes de agosto. Se me dijo, y ahí llegó la guerra del diablo en el mes de agosto. Tienes que mandar la palabra, tienes que decirle al mundo y que se prepare, porque ahí viene el diablo con los dientes puntados. Todos los santos que quieren oír, diles a todos que se preparen con comida, con rezos, porque se van a tener que esconderse, porque el diablo sabe que ellos no pueden hacer nada si no se esconden, porque la fuerza del diablo hasta la extrema, la colmena del diablo va a ser los mate de los negritos. Sí. Mira de los negritos. Sí. Y ahí las valles más del mundo, y ahí las cosas sucias, diablo. Junta a tu familia y reza, y reza, y reza. Tienen que apuntar los ojos, los sentidos, todas las cosas de Dios. Pero quiero que busquen un lugar donde se escondan en el día que todo se para. Ya están los perros buscándote con la fiebre del pozo. Ya comenzó el fin, mis hijos y mis hijas. Abre los ojos, abre los sentidos. Esta es la palabra de tu Dios, con el Hijo, con el Espíritu Santo. Este es el Papá, diciéndote los consejos del cielo, con la mente limpia, con la mente, todo que es el cielo. Quiero que los soldados de mi Hijo que rezan, porque ahí vienen los pingos con la fiebre del diablo. Sí, lístate soldados de mi Hijo, lístate con fiebre del cielo, porque mi Hijo te va a usar. Van a pelear la guerra de lo que es bueno con lo que es malo, con los rezos del cielo, con la fiebre del cielo. No tengan suicidio, porque ya ganaron y ya se está cerrando el libro, hoja por hoja, libro por libro, todo lo que dije en la Biblia, y no vas a acabar hasta todo lo que te dije, todas las letras, todas las palabras, todo lo que te dije el país de los negritos, con los armates de Estados Unidos, en el día de agosto, va a ser el día que vas a conocer las cosas buenas y las cosas malas, porque te vas a asustar con la fuerza del diablo, las cosas del diablo, la manera del diablo, porque el diablo te va a enseñar con los soldados de él qué puede hacer y cómo lo puede hacer, porque a él no le importa de nada más para matar y quebrar todo lo que es bueno. Acuérdate que te dije la fecha, los países de los negritos, y ya digo, la guerra del diablo, 7:17 a.m. Radio.
This is AMTV News. I'm your host, Topher Morrison. Today is Wednesday, July 11th, 2012. If it bleeds, it leads. Russian warships to maneuver near Syria. Bashar al-Assad looks like he has a new pit bull, protecting its last ally in the Middle East, but most importantly, its access to the Mediterranean. Russia is sending a flotilla of 11 Russian warships, capable of carrying hundreds of Marines to dock in the ancient port of Tartus. It is a clear message to the region and the U.S. backing rebel forces in Syria. Washington is predictably mum, but with poker faces aplenty. Is it call or check? This is AMTV News. I'm your host, Topher Morrison. Today is finally Friday the 13th of July 2012. War drums. U.S. sends 4th aircraft carrier to Persian Gulf. Along with a fleet of Sea Fox drone submersibles, the aircraft carrier USS John C. Stennis will join the Eisenhower, Lincoln, and Enterprise in the Persian Gulf. It's an unexpected show of extraordinary force and comes on the heels of a 12,000-troop, 19-nation, massive military drill imitating a Middle East invasion. U.S. raises, Iran, your bet.
Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green. You're watching Green Wave TV Alternative Media Television. It is June 1st, 2012. I wanted to do this in more of a mini-doc format, but because time is of the essence and war could be declared literally at any moment, I'm going to do the best I can to deliver this off the cuff, give you the critical information that you need, and so that you understand what's happening in the world geopolitically as well as our financial markets at this given point in time. There's an article I want every single one of you to read. I'm going to flash the cover of Time magazine. This is the recent issue that came out May 28th. It's got a picture of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel. They're calling him King Bibi. King. Notice how they call him a king. These people are no longer elected officials. And it says, will he make war or will he make peace? Now we need to read between the lines here because this is a mainstream media propaganda piece. Time magazine, millions of people, millions of Americans read this, millions of people around the world. In fact, they had a Time magazine article before the preemptive strike on Iraq linking Saddam Hussein to 9/11 and to that tragic terrorist act. That later came out to be improved. Completely false. In fact, President Bush himself has even been on camera saying, hey, we never said that. We never said Saddam Hussein was linked to the terrorist attack of September 11th. So this is what you need to primarily understand. At any moment, we're going to wake up. And I don't know what's going to happen. I can't predict the future. I don't have a crystal ball. But we could have an event. We could have another false flag terrorist attack. We could have a suitcase bomb go off in an American city or go off in a country around the world. But we're going to wake up and we are going to read the major headlines, and it's going to be Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu launching an aggressive strike that's going to lead our country and this world to the next great global conflict, which I believe will be World War III. Now, something to note, and if you read this Time magazine article, they're positioning it as if this will be a unilateral strike by Israel. Unilateral, meaning they will be acting independently and solely striking Iran. This is not true. This is bullshit. Read between the lines and understand this as propaganda. Let me repeat. Any strike by Israel against Iran or Syria, any strike is not a unilateral strike. It is a bilateral strike. And a strike by Israel is a strike by the United States of America. Also, I've talked about the timeline on these Iran sanctions. Notice today, June 1st, 2012, the sanctions on Iran regarding their oil contracts and how they trade their oil exports goes in effect today. This is an economic act of war. And so countries around the world, the other big players, namely countries like Russia, China, the BRICS, emerging markets, have to decide whether or not they're going to continue doing business with Iran. If they choose to do so, which it appears that they do, the superpowers like Russia, China, and India, that is a declaration of war on the United States of America. That gives our country incentive, or at least that's how they're going to pitch it to the mainstream sheeple, for an attack on Iran. Also notice, and this was actually exposed in the Time magazine article, that Iran, we have already been implementing sanctions, economic sanctions on their central bank for months now. This has created a cataclysm in the localized economy of Iran. It's created hyperinflation of 75%. This is according to Time magazine, 75%. You know, we talk about economic collapse all the time. This is economic collapse. Iran has been devastated economically. They have nothing left to lose. Again, I've always talked about how this is the boiling pot of water and that at some point it won't be able to be contained. So critical to understand, and we're seeing this in our capital markets as well, even though that really isn't the big story. Europe's collapsing. Greece is on fire. In fact, an article and a few other sources that came out through Russia Today as well as a few other outlets said that they are starting to trade through Bloomberg investment machines the drachma. And they tested that out earlier this morning, which shows you that they are planning for a revaluation of Greece back to a national currency. That is going to drive Greece into civil war. There's going to be a lot of chaos. It's going to set a very dangerous precedent for the Eurozone. The Eurozone itself is collapsing. So we have to understand the confluence of events and put yourself in the driver's seat. Say you're President Obama. Say you're the bankers. Say you're the powers that be. Say you're Israel. You are going to drive not just the collapse of the Eurozone, not just the collapse of Greece, but you are also going to accelerate war in coordination with that. We're going to have a collapse of Europe, and we're going to have an aggressive war with Iran, and more than likely in Syria. I believe this will be the full-blown engagement of the next great war that we will unfortunately be living through during the 21st century, which will cost millions more people's lives and millions more civilians to be killed. It is critical that we understand the motivations of our government and that we read between the lines of the propaganda. It has been the agenda all along to destabilize the Middle East. It's exactly why we've been in Iraq. It's exactly why we've been in Afghanistan, and we've built our bases so that we can quickly and readily deploy troops to neighboring countries, Iran and Syria. This has been the objective all along. Also, the objective of destroying Europe, destroying the euro, destroying the Eurozone, and collapsing their localized economies, as well as reverting back to national currencies, has all been a part of the plan. This is when they will introduce and begin to introduce a new currency, a new economic system that they say will be available to you, the sheeple, the people, the peasants of the world, as your saving grace, as the new way to operate. So I wanted to do a piece, and I'm still working on, I want to do a micro-documentary on this where I'm digging more into the evidence, something that's more compelling that can get the message out to the most people. But I don't think we have a lot of time, and I really do feel in my gut that we could wake up any morning now. Not only do we have an official declaration, an economic declaration of war, but I think at any moment we could wake up and see Israel launching a full-blown attack on Iran. Now understand how they're going to pitch this to you, how they're going to pitch this to Americans, because they're positioning this, again, as a unilateral strike by Israel. That couldn't be further from the truth. Any strike by Israel is a strike by the United States. And the way that they're going to play it off is they're going to show Israel making the first move. And then it's going to take a few days or a couple of weeks, and Obama's going to come on camera and say that the United States has decided to support our ally, and then we're going to deploy troops that are already there, that are already in Iraq, that are already in Afghanistan, ready to be deployed into Iran and Syria. And they're going to say that we're going to support Israel with our full military might of the United States of America. So understand, this has all been pre-planned. This is the collapse. We are living through it now. This is also the onset and the start of a global conflict I believe will be known as World War III. And it's going to cost millions of people's lives. Please get the message out. Please better understand what's happening around the world today. Understand what's happening politically. Understand what's happening economically. And understand that you, the everyday Joe, John, Jane on the street, American or citizen of the world, is being brainwashed by your country, is being brainwashed by the administration, is being brainwashed by the White House, our president, the bankers, the powers that be. The end goal is global war, is a complete totalitarian takeover of the world. They will be implementing a police state. They will be introducing a new global currency, and it's going to expense, and this is important, it's going to expense you, the 99%. The 99% of you are the ones that are going to be expensed. This war with Iran is very much economically driven. It is economically driven by the fact that the United States has passed the point of no return with quantitative easing, QE1, QE2, QE3, that Europe has passed the point of no return. We're seeing this with sovereign debt in Europe. We're seeing this here in the United States with a huge inflow of institutional money setting new record lows in the U.S. bond market. Some analysts and some of the major banks, including Goldman Sachs, are saying that the 10-year note here in the United States could touch as low as 1%. Throughout the coming months. This is giving us tall tale warning signs that there is no escaping what's coming our way. There is no escaping war. There is no escaping the economic collapse. Please get this message out to everybody you know, and please educate your friends and family so they better understand what's driving this global conflict, what's driving this war, and so that they fully understand that when Israel strikes Iran, this is also a strike by the United States of America, a direct strike. And war has been the goal all along. Just like we were propagandized into Iraq, just like we were propagandized and sold the lie and the bullshit that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11, we are now being sold the lie of Iran's nuclear facilities and the fact that we need to destroy these facilities to prevent them from building a nuclear bomb. This is propaganda, this is BS, this is more about controlling the Middle East, controlling its natural resources, controlling its interests, and more importantly, continuing the destabilizing effect in this area. This is also about economic collapse, and this is also about the fact that the United States is clearly out of options, so is Europe, and so is Israel. I'm Christopher Green. You've been watching Green Wave TV, alternative media television, and I just delivered the Daily Wave. Hard-hitting and in your face, America.
Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green. Breaking news. It is Monday, of course, July 2nd, 2012. I want to show you an article here from RT Russia Today. I've been talking about for several years now the threat that the United States is posing with Iran, countries like Syria, the threat and possibility of the Strait of Hormuz being closed, that would send oil prices sky high. This has all been a part of the plan. The United States, of course, has implemented sanctions starting June 1st. This is all reaching a boiling point. Now Iran, having nothing left to lose, is responding. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's government is now passing a bill to close the Strait of Hormuz. A tremendous amount of oil flows through that passageway. It's an extremely big deal. This could send oil prices sky high in the near term. Let's take a look at the article. This is Iran lawmakers prepare to close the Hormuz Strait. Iranian lawmakers have drafted a bill that would close the Strait of Hormuz for oil tankers heading to countries supporting current economic sanctions against the Islamic Republic. There is a bill prepared in the National Security and Foreign Policy Committee of Parliament that stresses the blocking of oil tanker traffic carrying oil to countries that have sanctioned Iran. The bill has been developed as an answer to the European Union's oil sanctions against the Islamic Republic. This is from Wikipedia. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow, strategically important strait between the Gulf of Oman in the southeast and the Persian Gulf. The strait is at its narrowest, 21 nautical miles wide. It is the only sea passage to the open ocean for large areas of the petroleum exporting Persian Gulf and is one of the most strategically important choke points. Now this is what's key. Approximately 20% of the world's oil, which is about 35% of seaborne traded oil, passes through the strait. So you can see why this is such a strategic point in a strategic area in the world for the trade of oil, and why this will have such a significant impact on the world's oil price. This is also a perfect time, of course, to pull the veil over the eyes of everyday Americans as we approach and enter the July 4th holiday on Wednesday. You know, a time of great pride, which, you know, many in our country celebrate, and for good reason, celebrating Independence Day. But this is also a time that the U.S. government and our officials would launch a war and a further escalation in both Syria and Iran. So I'd be paying very close attention as we approach the holiday, and I'll also be paying attention on Wednesday as all of this is reaching a boiling point and all of this is escalating in Iran. Again, Iran has nothing left to lose. We've had sanctions implemented against Iran along with Europe and other Western powers for months now. This has crippled Iran's central banks. Their localized economies have entered hyperinflation. The rial losing some 70% plus of its value overnight. And now they're implementing, now the U.S. along with Western powers are implementing the oil sanctions and the oil embargo along with this. This is the same tyranny that we saw, the same type of embargo that took place and was sanctioned against Japan 6 months before the tragic attack on Pearl Harbor and Honolulu. And again, Iran, just like Japan, before the outbreak of World War II, has nothing left to lose at this point. The United States has clearly shown its colors, has clearly shown itself as an enemy of Tehran, as an enemy of Syria, of Bashar al-Assad's regime, and the next logical step is war. So I think as a byproduct of this, oil prices could move sky high from here, even though we've had quite a significant sell-off in recent weeks, followed by some of the biggest uptick moves we've seen in history. This is all gravitating towards war. This is all gravitating to a much larger, broader, violent, and deadly conflict in the Middle East. I'm Christopher Green. You're watching Green Wave TV, alternative media television, and I just delivered the Daily Wave. Hard-hitting and in your face, America.
There is a well-known Sahih Hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said that you're going to make an alliance with Rome. Is it in Surah Rum? Rome. And in that surah we are told at the very first ayah that Rome was defeated. Rome was defeated. Did you hear that? Rome was defeated. But in a few years' time, Rome will be victorious. Who is Rome? At the time when the Quran was revealed, who was it who was defeated? Was it a city in Italy, you dum-dum? Why don't you do a little bit of research before you come to this foolish conclusion? When the Quran says that Rome was defeated, the Quran was not talking about a city in Italy called Rome. No. The Quran was talking about the Byzantine Christian Empire, which had its capital city in Constantinople. Where is Rome today? It's no longer in Constantinople because the Byzantine Empire no longer exists. But the Eastern Christian Orthodox Church and religion still exists. That is Rome. Who it is who now leads that community of Eastern Christian Orthodox believers? The answer is Russia. That's the answer. And so when the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wassalam, that you will make an alliance with Rome, he was certainly not talking about a Yankee alliance. Someone should tell that to the Pakistan Armed Forces. He was not talking about an alliance with Britain, or with France, or with Germany, or with Israel. When he spoke about an alliance with Rome, he was referring to an alliance with the Eastern Christian Orthodox Church. And therefore to those who now rule over that community, which is Russia. Russia. And so a Muslim alliance with Russia is anticipated by the Prophet ﷺ, and it will come. And you have an alliance with Russia, as prophesied in the Hadith. Then the Russian Navy can enter into the Mediterranean. The Russian submarines can enter into the Mediterranean from the Black Sea. And then the contest with Israel will become a more even-handed contest once you have nuclear-armed submarines in the Mediterranean.
According to the Russian journalist I talked to in Damascus, she said that these ships had come from Murmansk. So she said there were 3 or 4 nuclear submarines that were known, and maybe more, and I think also an anti-submarine warfare ship. So this, I think, highly significant, and I think the big thing that's hanging over all this is the tremendous, hysterical, Dr. Goebbels-style Western media blackout that this Russian fleet is there. There are even other reports that they're unloading these S-300 advanced surface-to-air missiles, the kind of thing that Gaddafi wanted, didn't get in time, the kind that Iran has asked for, and they still haven't gotten them, at least in the numbers they wanted, as far as we know. Anyway, that these are now being delivered to Syria. So this means that there's a whole new dimension of Russian support for Syria. 2 weeks ago, this past weekend, we also had the visit of the Russian Orthodox Patriarch, Kirill, Cyril. So he's Patriarch Cyril of the Russian Orthodox Church, the top religious authority of the Russian Federation, at least of the Christians, and he came there to Damascus to meet with the Grand Mufti of Damascus, who is a very interesting figure in his own right. I recommend you look him up.
We meet at a very dangerous moment in our history and in the history of the world to address you on the subject of implications of a Zionist-Israeli attack on Iran, which now appears to be not only fairly certain, but also just around the corner. We say that Israel wants to attack Iran because Israel ultimately wants to rule the world. Because the Zionists want to rule the world. Because the Judeo-Christian Zionist European Alliance wants to deliver to the state of Israel the status of ruling state in the world. That's why we believe all these wars are taking place. And so this is why they want to attack Iran. You have the right to wage war against the people unjustly. And so an attack on Iran would be unjust war. But I want to say something more. To those who are beating the drums of war in the Arab world, and who are looking forward to the attack on Iran, that you are beating the drums of unjust war. And when the attack takes place, you will be committing the same sin as supporters of the war, as those who are themselves perpetrating the war. And shame on you! Shame on you, we say to you, straight to your faces, from here in Malaysia, that if you support the attack on Iran, you are supporting unjust war. You are yourselves a party of dhulm, and Allah does not provide guidance to the people who commit dhulm. One of the reasons why many Arabs, not all Arabs, but many Arabs are beating the drums of war, looking forward to an attack on Iran, is because Iran is Shia. They hold the view that Shia are kuffar, and hence it is permissible to launch war on the kuffar, the disbelievers. How can you come to this conclusion that the Shia are kuffar? If the Shia are kuffar, then there must be some ijma' or consensus of opinion on that subject. That consensus has never been achieved in 1400 years. As a consequence, we say it is too late in the day now for you to come with any manufactured arguments declaring the Shia to be kuffar. The drum beating against the Shia and the attack which is about to be launched on Iran is located in a larger framework in which those who are waging war on Islam are seeking to do something that will function as a catalyst for creating Sunni-Shia civil war in the world of Islam. Sunni-Shia civil war would be something that would be massively beneficial for Israel. Number one, Sunni-Shia civil war will make Islam look negatively, a negative image in the world, at a moment when Islam is center stage in the attention of the whole world. Number two, Sunni-Shia civil war in Islam, Sunni versus Shia, would function as a diversion, diverting attention, both Muslim and non-Muslim attention, away from the plans of the Zionists to rule the world. Thirdly, Muslims fighting against themselves will obviously lead to a loss of power. Our power will decrease, and that will be strategically advantageous for Israel. War on Iran obviously is going to impact on the world economy. Number one, on the price of oil. Not only because Iran is a major supplier of oil, but also because Iran is located in that basin that the Iranians call the Persian Gulf and the Arabs call the Arab Gulf, and they're still fighting over the words. The price of oil is going to shoot up because Iran can also block the Straits of Hormuz. You see, Iranian territory on this side and Oman on that side. It's not difficult for Iran to block the Straits of Hormuz and disrupt all the passage of oil tankers. So we can anticipate fairly confidently that the price of oil is going to escalate dramatically once the attack takes place. And the American government knows that. And that's why the American government does not want Iran to be attacked. Because the American government knows, and the Federal Reserve knows, and the bankers also know, that the US dollar is going to collapse. It will not survive an Israeli attack on Iran with the price of oil shooting up through the roof. And if the US dollar collapses, of course they're going to have to demonetize the US dollar. It will no longer be legal tender. They have to have something in place. They probably already have something to replace it, but at a fraction of its previous value. The American economy is going to collapse. Large numbers of white Americans are going to lose their wealth. And many of them are going to be listening to this lecture. There's going to be chaos in the United States when the economy collapses. There can be riots in the United States, and they're already anticipating that. And so an attack on Iran would lead to economic, financial, and monetary consequences that will be disastrous for the USA. An attack on Iran can be launched simultaneously with an attack on Pakistan. The purpose would be to eliminate Pakistan from the nuclear club. And it is time for Muslims around the world to recognize, including Muslims in Iran, that Israel's most strategic partner, most strategic ally in the world today, after the United States, is India, with Saudi Arabia neck and neck behind India. And so, not only must India be involved in the attack, but also when the attack takes place on Pakistan, and if it succeeds, then in the sequel it is India who must now control the region on Israel's behalf. The denuclearization of Pakistan and the breakup of Pakistan into bits and pieces will impact upon Muslims in the whole of that subcontinent in such a way as to bring about a state of demoralization and despair, and send shock waves to Muslims in the rest of the world. That one of the largest Muslim communities around the world, in India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, have now come under the foot of Hindu India. So India will rule the entire South Asia, with NATO in control in Afghanistan, for the United States of America. Israel will attack Iran in order to commence wars that she hopes will follow one after the other. As soon as Israel attacks Iran, the first implication is that Iran is going to attack Iraq. And Iran is strategically poised, advantageously poised, to attack the United States in Iraq. That Iran is also likely to attack Bahrain. And it should not be difficult for Iran to take Bahrain. Bahrain cannot stand up to an attack from Iran. Bahrain is just across the water from Iran. I am suggesting to you that Iran is going to attack and take Bahrain. And if and when Iran attacks and takes Bahrain, then there's a causeway between Bahrain and Saudi Arabia where you can drive back and forth. The road will be clear to Saudi Arabia. I am anticipating, and the Saudis probably already have their plans laid out very well, because they know what's going to happen. And Israel already knows what's going to happen. That they're then going to turn to the United States to invoke whatever secret agreements they have of defense. But the United States has to intervene in Saudi Arabia to protect Saudi Arabia from an attack from Iran. I think the Zionists in the US Congress will ensure, even though the US armed forces would not want to go in there, even though the Barak administration would not want to go into Saudi Arabia, the Zionists in the US Congress will ensure that American forces will have to enter into Saudi Arabia to face Iran. They're setting a trap for the United States, so that the United States is going to be led to a situation where it's going to be facing defeat. I think that for Russia and for China, an Israeli attack on Iran, particularly if it involves the use of nuclear weapons, would be recognized as a threshold being crossed. And so long as you did not cross that threshold, Russia and China were prepared to go along and continue. In the Security Council of the United Nations, for example, cooperating and collaborating where possible in managing the affairs of the world. But once you cross that threshold, the implication for Russia and China is that you have crossed the point of no return. And that an attack on Iran is now going to inevitably lead to World War. That after Iran and after Pakistan and after the Arabs, the Zionists are going to turn on China and Russia to make sure that China and Russia also bend down their knees and accept Israel, so that Israel can become the ruling state in the world. And so Russia and China would know, today it's them, tomorrow it's us. And they're not going to wait until tomorrow to recognize that. The minute Iran is attacked, they will recognize that the threshold has been crossed and that we are now moving inevitably towards nuclear war. Russia and China acted strangely on Libya. You remember? When the vote came to the Security Council, they abstained, knowing full well that if they abstain, the resolution will be carried, and that is the end of Gaddafi and end of the Libyan government. Why did they do that? I felt that perhaps they knew what the plan was, and they wanted to let the Western world, NATO, to sink deeper and deeper into a quagmire, you know, like shifting sands, you can't get out. So eventually they will end up in the graveyard, and only then will Russia and China attack them. How are Russia and China responding to Syria at the moment? How will Russia and China respond to an attack on Iran and on Pakistan? My understanding is that Russia and China are going to be quite different in the way they have behaved so far in international affairs. Quite different once the attack on Iran takes place. And so we will be heading ultimately towards World War.
Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. The world situation continues to deteriorate. It is July 1914. The big news of the past 24 hours. An ultimatum issued by China against the United States. Don't attack Pakistan or you will face retaliation from China. This is the first time in recent decades, the first time I can remember anybody issuing an ultimatum against the United States. We could, of course, go back to last week and reinterpret the Gilani speech about full force retaliation as an ultimatum in its own way. Now taken together, these two statements unquestionably constitute ultimata. This is the kind of language we heard in July 1914. This is the kind of language we heard in late August 1939. When the great powers begin to issue ultimata, one against the other, this is a sign of extreme, acute danger of general war. That is what we now have. It has been created by the Anglo-American imperialist madmen and their quest for confrontation with Pakistan, leading to a breakup of that country. They wish to destroy Pakistan as the leading strategic ally of China, and this has now been fully recognized in Beijing. But let's get to the number one story. This now comes from the Times of India, the section known as the Economic Times, and it's an article dateline Beijing and Islamabad, China on Thursday. That would be the China doing this on the 19th of May, on Thursday, said the international community must respect, that's a quote, must respect Pakistan's sovereignty and territorial integrity. This is the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhang Yu telling the media at the press conference that, quote, the sovereignty and territorial integrity of China must be respected. She goes on to say, all quotes, we believe that Pakistan has made great contributions to international counterterrorism efforts as well as huge sacrifices. The international community should understand and support Pakistan's effort to restore national stability and develop its economy. We have Prime Minister Gilani of Pakistan in Beijing. We'll have more on that visit in a minute. But Gilani tells Pakistan that he met with Premier Wen Jiabao, and the Gilani quote is, China supports Pakistan on its own. I think it means as its own, that China is as committed to Pakistan as it is to itself. In other words, it's a complete alliance. Gilani says, quote, there should be no harm to the Pakistani sovereignty, and the U.S. should understand and appreciate it. But now here's the heart of the matter. The news of Pakistan quotes Chinese diplomatic sources, and the Chinese diplomatic sources say, quote, this is, China has, quote, warned in unequivocal terms that any attack on Pakistan would be construed as an attack on China. Let me repeat that. China has warned the United States, quote, warned in unequivocal terms that any attack on Pakistan would be construed as an attack on China, end quote, say diplomatic sources to the news of Pakistan. And this warning, according to this article in the Times of India, the warning was formally conveyed by the Chinese foreign minister at last week's China-U.S. strategic dialogue and economic talks in Washington. That's an ultimatum. The last explicit ultimatum of the great powers that I can recall is 1956, Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev, during the Suez Crisis, issued an ultimatum to Britain and France, stop attacking Egypt or you will be hit by Soviet nuclear-armed IRBMs and SLBMs, that is, short-range and intermediate-range ballistic missiles. The Soviet Union, to my knowledge, never issued any ultimatum against the United States, never. It looks to me like China has now delivered an ultimatum behind closed doors, but that's, of course, how it works. That's how it worked in July 1914. All the stuff became public later on. Those were telegraph messages, not public speeches. So again, China warned in unequivocal terms that any attack on Pakistan would be construed as an attack on China, says the news of Pakistan, quoting diplomatic sources in Beijing, and I'm looking at an article in the Times of India. That is a very big deal. That is a world historical turning point. Now, that goes together with the Gilani speech of several days before, that is to say, the Gilani speech of, let's see, earlier in May 11th, we have Gilani with his famous reference to full force retaliation. Let's just go back and rehearse that one, because that now emerges in retrospect as a key ultimatum as well. This is Monday, the 11th of May. Gilani talking to the Pakistani parliament, and I quote, "Let no one draw any wrong conclusions. Any attack against Pakistan's strategic assets, whether overt or covert, will find a matching response. Pakistan reserves the right to retaliate with full force. No one should underestimate the resolve and capacity of our nation and armed forces to defend our sacred homeland." That's also pretty explicit. Full force retaliation. Now, the strategic assets in question are, of course, the Pakistani nuclear forces. We have referred here over the weeks to the McChrystal plan drawn up by General Stanley McChrystal at the Joint Special Operations Command, Fort Bragg. This is called Task Force Orange. Task Force Orange is tasked with seizing the Pakistani nuclear forces, seizing them, disable them, concentrating them, stealing them, getting them out of the country. These are located in various Pakistani air bases, and the goal is to go after them. And that, of course, is